Okay, so I have been wanting to do this video for some time now. I did do a live video exposing Fauci, and I don't know where that went. So what I'm doing today is basically going to be reading from a couple of books that I have discovered some information that was prompted by the Holy Spirit. I have these two books here. One's called Plague by Judy Mikovitis, and then Official Stories by Scheff. So I'm going to I'm going to start with Plague. And I was in my prayer room and God asked me to look at this book. And I had been having some intuitions, a gut instinct that Dr. Fauci was just someone that I couldn't trust. And lo and behold, I picked up this book because everything's going on with the COVID-19, and I was like, oh yeah, I have this book, and I found his name in this book. So it says, how could I possibly imagine that about a year and a half later, on November 17th, 2011, while I was preparing to return to Dr. Frank Richetti's lab in Frederick, Maryland, which I think is Fort Frederick, and participate in the multi-center validation study directed by Dr. Ian Lipkin, an email would be sent to Frank by none other than Dr. Tony Fauci, head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. In the email, Fauci stated, I could participate in this study, but if I step foot on National Institutes of Health property, I would be immediately interested. She then said, is that science? So I'm going to share with you now what I have learned about Dr. Fauci and what his career is all about. It's really about HIV and AIDS and having this false narrative that those two are correlated. If you don't know anything about that, then I advise you to look more into that. So someone who is supposed to know about all these infectious diseases, I'm not saying that he's not a smart man, but I'm saying that he has built his career on false narratives, and I'm actually quoting Dr. Shiva when I say that. So right now I'm going to share with you the beginning of Dr. Fauci, and I got this information from another Instagram user. I will link her in this next video. Just to give you a backdrop on this book, Plague, by Judy Mikovitis, Dr. Judy. So it says that Judy Mikovitis had her PhD in microbiochemistry and molecular biology from George Washington University and was an AIDS and cancer researcher of more than 30 years, but people often said she had a second career. Actually, she was a Christian. And over the years, she had run volunteer cancer support groups and would often research and review treatment options for people and accompany them on doctor visits. She then became she moved from cancer research into a high-profile investigation of myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, or MECFS, taking the position of research director at the startup Whitmore Peterson Institute for Neuroimmune Disease, or WPI, housed at the University of Nevada, Reno campus. So just to help you understand that, then I'm going to bring you to page 171 of this book. It talks about Annette Whitmore, who was the president or the head of the WPI, or Whitmore Peterson Institute. So in this paragraph on 171, it says, Annette Whitmore hit a wall with a senior grants administrator of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases that was directed by Dr. Anthony Fauci. Fauci was a notorious foe turned friend to many people with AIDS in the early years of the pandemic, when his later friend Larry Kramer, the well-known activist and writer with AIDS, called him a murderer. So I sat with that for a little while. Didn't know what that actually meant until I connected it with this book here, Official Stories by Liam Scheff. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of the history of HIV. I'm going to read, and I'm not going to read this whole chapter, but I wanted to touch base upon just the history of HIV and what it says in this book, all of his research. If you don't know who Liam Scheff is, you can also look him up. He has broken national stories of pharmaceutical badness, been published widely in print and on the web, and he comes from a family of medical professionals. Chapter 6, HIV, the Scarlet Letter. The official story: a hunter somewhere in Africa, maybe Cameroon, met a monkey, fell in love, and the rest was history. Well, no. But it's hard to tell what's supposed to be true in HIV land. The official story of HIV is always changing. It's been backdated several times, and even today, the official version is being radically altered. First, it began somewhere in the 1970s, then it was the 60s, then the 50s. Don't you remember the AIDS plague of the Summer of Love? Neither does anyone else, but the mainstream does like to tell stories. Now they've backdated it to the 1800s. The gold rush, the Civil War, HIV, the invention of the motor car. No kidding, that's the official line. But it's too bizarre, so we'll come back to it. For now, we'll start with the familiar, the ad line, the one you see on billboards or in the New York Times. The official story: HIV causes AIDS. HIV is a virus. It is spread sexually and through intravenous drug use. It's a fatal, incurable disease. The lone gunman: sex, drug injection, and blood transfusion. The magic bullet: HIV, the virus that causes death, but pretty slowly and mysteriously. The HIV official story contradicts itself early. Let's go a level deeper, keeping it all official. Okay, so I'm just going to read this part. It says, scratch 1. HIV is not a virus, but a retrovirus. It is believed to infect T cells, a subset of white blood cells. The loss of T cells eventually makes the immune system weak enough to fall prey to very common, typically weak fungi and bacteria, microscopic fellow travelers in the environment, which an average immune system cannot be penetrated by and just pings away without notice. So the official version mutates from virus to retrovirus, and we see the first believed to infect T cells, quote unquote. Scratch 2, and still official. HIV is believed to be a retrovirus that is believed to infect T cells. The means by which HIV infects these cells is still under examination. Scratch 3. HIV infection is inferred from HIV test results, which are believed to test for HIV, but which are known to come up positive for many illnesses and non-illnesses. HIV is believed to be a retrovirus that somehow either damages, stimulates, or does something else to the immune system over a long or short period of time. How HIV causes AIDS remains a mystery. No fudging, that's still official. None of that is even mildly hyperbolic. That is the language of AIDS. Scratch 4. HIV infection is inferred from a test that in fact has no standards for determining the presence or absence of HIV infection and comes up positive for an unknown number of conditions. These include pregnancy, flus, colds, vaccination, drinking, drugging, and sex, or just being alive, or being around animals, or being an animal, a mouse, dog, or cow, for example. HIV is believed to be a retroviral particle, which is considered fragile, wily, never the same, and which cannot be purified or isolated. Various budding particle coming out, various photos of putative HIV tend to resemble every other kind of normal budding particle coming out of the both healthy and sick cells. Furthermore, HIV has never been observed in any way, shape, or form eating, humping, squeezing, biting, being angry at, stimulating, flattering with false praise, or in any other way molesting or infecting T cells. How HIV causes AIDS remains a rather profound mystery, and besides a bit of colorful language, that's still official. It's just not what they put on billboards. So how do we get from 4, the truth, to 1, the ad? I think it's best unrolled by a story. So pull up your chair, get some tea, sit yourself down comfortably on the fluffy rug, and warm yourself by the fire. We're going to talk about sex and boys, and drugs and life as it was lived in the groovy, wild, effed up 1970s. So from here, he discusses Richard Nixon. Henry Kissinger is involved in all of this. His name actually just popped up recently. So Richard Nixon, a perspiring, paranoid former U.S. congressman from Orange County, California, had become a terribly unpopular president. The kids hated him. The adults thought he was, at best, a second-rater. For his part, he hated and mistrusted everyone around him. His personality was so pungent, so original in its dodgy repulsiveness that his very name has become an adjective, Nixonian. So in 1971, to deflect attention from political intrigue and failure, Richard Nixon declared a war on cancer. He threw $100 million of real money, 1970s dollars, into this new venture, which the virus hunters grabbed to pad their tenures while trying to demonstrate that cancer had a contagious cause, because a sneezable cancer meant the creation of vaccines and drugs that everyone would want forever. It was a dream of an eternal market. Nixon compared this new war on cancer to the race to the moon and the splitting of the atom. Researchers around the world heard the jingle of hard coins. In America, David Baltimore, Peter Duesberg, and Robert Gallo, that's an important name to note in France, Luc Montagnier and Etienne de Herven, and in New York, for disclosure's sake, my grandparents, Robert C. Mellers and Jane Mellers, all formed a flood of PhDs pouring their sub-microscopic attention on mouse viruses that might relate to human viruses that might relate to cancer. But from the start, they weren't really looking for a virus. They were looking for an enzyme that they said stood in for a virus. That enzyme, or really type of enzyme, was one they considered special because it copied material back into the genome.